Now, President Muhammadu Buhari assumed the reins of governance in 2015, brandishing a three-pronged set of priorities, including war against corruption and terror, as well as economic resuscitation. As part of a wider plan to re-engineer the economy, his administration embarked on an ambitious program of infrastructure development and promptly turned a former governor of Lagos State, Babatunde Fashola, senior advocate of Nigeria, to direct operations in that sector as Minister of Power, Works and Housing. With just weeks to go before the administration drops anchor, question on the lips of many Nigerians is how much has President Buhari achieved in infrastructural development? Well, Babatunde Fashola, SAN, joins us now to discuss the administration's scorecard in this area and what next for him after about 20 years in the service of Lagos State and Nigeria. Good afternoon, Mr. Fashola, and thank you for your time.
Good afternoon.
Well, with just a few weeks to the end of this administration, can you just give us, a comparative overview of the housing situation you met in 2015 in comparison to what's on ground at the moment?
I think the fair thing to just say is that we have improved upon what we met. Directly from ministerial action, we have built houses in 35 states and the FCT under the National Housing Program, and that has impacted Nigerians who either were employed as contractors in the building process, or were artisans, or were suppliers, and a total value chain of economic opportunities over 8 years. Those jobs were not there when those projects didn't start. That is one major impact. Of course, the other impact is the homeowners, and perhaps one example, I can't give you the names of all of the homeowners off the top of my head, but I remember members of the Super Eagles who were promised houses in 1994. It was these houses that enabled President Buhari to redeem the pledge made to them on behalf of the federal government and the Republic of Nigeria, made in 1994, 28 years after. They are homeowners now. So that is part of the message of change. They have a very pleasant story and experience to tell. And if you go back 2015, and now, you will see that almost on a daily basis, many media houses and platforms, including yours, carry advertorials today of houses for sale, houses on offer, on different and flexible terms across the country. And it was perhaps not at this stage if it was a thing of presence at the time. And that just shows you there's a lot of private sector investment and involvement now in housing delivery, and that is how it should be. But people see only the building side. There's the documentation side. Perhaps in a long time from now, in the past, we have issued thousands of C of Os because people also need those title documents. They are enablers to housing. We have impacted that. We have also issued thousands of consents to assignments, sale of houses, sale of land to enable the delivery of housing, as well as to mortgages granted by banks. And that is going on. One of the things we'll be leaving behind in that sector is the full digitization of the federal government land registry. We have scanned 53,000 files, and that's a lot of documents, millions of pages of documents, so that in the next few days we will go live, and therefore issuance of C of Os, instead of me carrying bags, whoever is minister after me will just need a tablet, and he can access the back end and give approval wherever he or she is in the world with internet access. And that is, for me, a legacy of pride to leave behind. We are moving now to the next phase of that process, which is to make the process of applying for consent and subsequent transactions also digitalized. And that will complete the ease of doing business flow. So, and you will see also that more states are building houses because people forget that states own the land. And that is a major component of house building. And most states are playing in these days. So it's a national undertaking to provide more housing as against a federal government undertaking alone. Of course, I have been at the forefront of advocacy that we must see housing as shelter, and that means ownership and rental. And therefore, we must not just focus on those who can afford to buy. We must focus on young people who are just starting their careers, who are getting into the property market. Many of them start by rental. And you will see 2 days ago, the rent-to-own policy was given effect at our Zubaya housing estate, where some beneficiaries were personally handed their keys. Of course, those were not the only beneficiaries, but they were symbolic of a consciousness by this government to assist those who pay rent.
Very good, Mr. Fashola. But generally, what has changed? Are Nigerians better off now than in 2015, you think?
Clearly, this is the point I have made in my introductory response. Things are better. It may not have reached everybody, but for those who it has reached, and some of who have mentioned to you, things are better. In the construction industry, they were laying off people when I took office, and that includes housing construction, and they're employing more people. The support industry, mining for construction materials, sand, aggregates, crushed stones, that industry's capacity has doubled in the last eight years. We may not focus on those industries because perhaps there was no conscious infrastructure development over the last 2 decades or so. But that is an area where people play. And if you ask the transporters who do the haulage, the Road Transport Employers Association, they will tell you that the experience has been better. And you can't disconnect this from why the APC was re-elected in 2019 and in 2023.
Well, noted, Mr. Fashola, but you know, when we look at these updates that you've given us, and we compare it to, you know, figures like what we see from the Bureau of Statistics that still says 28 million Nigerians lack access to decent and affordable housing. And the recommendation by the Federal Mortgage Bank of Nigeria is that in order to tackle this, we need to see more collaborative measures, because it would actually cost 21 trillion to, you know, to fill out that housing gap. So can you tell us about collaborative efforts that you've made, or the groundwork that you've done to ensure that, you know, that what you've put on ground so far can be worked on or built on?
Let me start first from the figure of 28 million people that you quote and attribute to the MBS. And I will be surprised if the MBS claims that figure. Because when I took office, I was saddled with a publicly touted 17 million housing deficit. And I said to myself, I think it is important before you embark on this journey to understand how those figures were arrived at. Because if the nation has 17 million housing deficit, it presupposes that you have to build 17 million houses. That is the cure to a proper diagnosis. And nobody could provide an answer to how that figure was arrived at. But I was determined. They first told me it was the World Bank. The World Bank denied it. They told me it was Africa Development Bank. Africa Development Bank disclaimed it. I asked the MBS, Dr. Kale, at the time, said no, that it wasn't their figure, and that he even had doubts about the authenticity of the figure. I finally found the figure. It was in a housing policy from this ministry in 2012, before my appointment, 3 years before my appointment. It was in the foreword of the minister. When I called her, she said, well, she just didn't pay attention. She was under pressure when she signed. So that figure has no basis, but it has evolved from 17 million to 28 million. I saw that on your program yesterday morning. And I think we should disown these figures as a responsible nation. It has no authenticity. Now, are there deficits? There are. And my argument, and I stand to be challenged and corrected in a debate about this, is that the deficit is more prevalent in the urban centers. And I have challenged the National Population Commission to help us collect the data in this next census exercise. So let us just get that right, so that before we start trying to cook a large meal for an imaginary number of guests and waste our undertaking, let us understand what the real problems are. And so I think that our approach should first be that the states, especially the urban centers, must focus. They have, and in any event, this is a shared constitutional responsibility about housing. So, but the rental side, which is where there is more damage, is not being addressed, and the federal government has no responsibility there. The federal government has fiscal responsibility in cost of foreign exchange and all of those things because they impact the cost of supply. So this is my response. In terms of access to finance, the Federal Mortgage Bank under this administration has reduced the threshold conditionalities for eligibility for people seeking mortgages of up to 5 million by removing the down payment requirement, the equity contribution of 10%. We removed it entirely, it's now zero. So you don't need an equity contribution to access that kind of loan. For those seeking to go 5 million and above, we've lowered it from 15% to 10%. And then we've also built in a rental scheme into all the housing estates we have built. As I speak, the Federal Mortgage Bank has delivered over 6,000 houses, FHA about 7,000. The National Housing Program that I spoke about across 35 states is about 5,000 to 6,000 units. But that is not the whole picture. That is not the Nigerian picture. It is the federal government picture so far under this administration. And then you have to look at the private sector, you have to look at the states.
Duly noted, Mr. Fashola, and thank you for your insight on that. You did mention that we shouldn't begin to cook a large meal based on these numbers, and the census would give us a better understanding about the estimate. But since you're disputing that 28 million Nigerians, and what you met was 17.7, I believe, what would you say from what you've seen so far? What would you put the number at so that we have a better sense of where it might be?
First of all, I am not disputing what doesn't. I'm just telling you that it doesn't exist. If you have the figure and the basis for arriving at it, put it out and let us have a discussion about it. I am saying that the first figure that was in the public space, even when I was governor, was 17 million. When I became minister, I said, how did you arrive at it? I am here to solve problems, and in order to solve problems, I must probably diagnose and define the problems before I start implementing solutions. So if you tell me there was 17 million, how was it computed? I need to know. And if you want to stick to a figure that doesn't exist, I can't really stop you, but I'm saying that we should stop this. It's absolutely foolish because that figure doesn't exist. I don't know any nation that has a 17 million housing deficit. Please show me one. The person who signed the document in which he was, I've had a conversation with her. And she said, look, she signed without paying attention. It was an error. And we are owning that error and racing down to the bottom with it. I admit there are deficits. There are deficits in the urban centers because people leave their homes in the rural areas. They leave houses to come and squat or rent houses in the urban centers. Let's be scientific and understand that this is consistent with what the UN has told us, that more people are moving to cities in the last 50 years of human existence. That makes sense to me. How many are they? We need to do a census. That's what a serious nation does. Do a survey, enumerate and get the data, and then say, this is authentic and this is scientific. For those who still want to choose 17 million and then they have multiplied it to 20, I leave them alone. But it is not a persuasive argument to me as a problem solver.
Very good, Mr. Fashola. Now, I'd like your thoughts on the issue of the federal housing authorities in terms of their supervisory role and keeping the sanctity of various estates like Festac Town, for example, which infrastructures are in dilapidated states, and you have a heavy commercialization of residential areas being converted for profit or retail businesses, as it were. I'd like your thoughts on, has FHA been able to do the needful in keeping the sanctity and, of course, the integrity of these residential estates like Festac Town?
Okay, let me set a context for that. And one of the things I did was, because of my own legal training, I understand that agencies like FHA are creatures of statute. The statute gives them their laws and their powers and their duties and their functions. And as a supervising minister, it is not my role to usurp those functions. It is my role to provide oversight to ensure that they keep to the tenets of the law and they also stay within the framework of broad government policy, exercising delegated authority to supervise them from the president. So I don't directly intervene in what all my parastatals, including FHA, does. But of course, we have had discussions about the need to restore some of the planning objectives of building Festac Town. A lot of damage has been done by breaking the law, the commercializations, the change of use that you speak about. We have been able to claw back some, not without resistance, and I must commend the current administration of the FHA, the board and the chair and the managing director. And you will see that when this new MD, Senator Ashafar, took office, this was one of the things in the news every day. He was alleged or accused of dislocating people, but they were in fact people who have acted in violation of the law. How much can be reclaimed back is a matter yet to see. One of the things we are also putting in place in furtherance of the Executive Order number 11 of 2022 regarding to public maintenance of buildings is to start a gradual repair, replacement, and maintenance of the Festac estate to restore some of what can be restored. Some have become irreversible, I must admit, and some will just result in needless and long-drawn litigation also. So there's a place where you must know and be practical. But I think that there's some progress along those lines. And the same is true of Gwarimpa Estate. So what we're trying to do with Zuba is to get FHA back to what was its focal recognition point, building large estates. And they are doing that now in each of the 6 geopolitical zones. So the one in the North Central was the one we just asked Mr. President to grace us, to let us have the honor of the presence of his presence to come and commission that. But the Federal Mortgage Bank also has houses under commissioning that have been completed. I plan to go and do some for them in Enugu and in Kano. So all of these are going on. So when you see the president and you see 748 houses, that's not all what we have done. But that's just a symbolism of the actions that are going on across the states. The boards of directors of FHA, Federal Mortgage Bank, are also going to commission their own estates, because I also, with all the best intentions, can't be there to commission all the estates for them. So I've asked them, you go out and go and do it. Maybe it's not attracting as much attention as a presidential presence, but if President Buhari were to go everywhere that we have worked, he would do nothing in 8 years, really and truly. That's the honest truth. We finished the local Weto Bridge, he can't go. We finished the Ecom Bridge, he can't go. We finished 3 secretariats, in 4 secretariats actually, in Nasarawa, in Bayelsa, in Oka, and Zamfara. He's been only able to come to Nasarawa. So I'm asking now that if he will approve for ministers from those states to go and formally hand over those assets for public use. So there's a lot that has been done by this administration, and we're still hoping that we will do a few more before we go. Certainly we can't finish all the work, but as I told you, some of the things we're handing over is transformation about how business is done in the lands sector of the housing ministry, about documentation. We're also trying to digitize the whole ministry. And if you come to our ministry today, we have our own independent power plant, solar, 1.5 megawatts, is perhaps the biggest public building solar facility on this continent for a public building. But people choose not to see it, but we know the impact it has made in how we do business here, and we will hand that over to the next team. We're not here for a show. We're just here to get things done.
All right, still talking about maintaining transparency. I still have to take you back on the issue of Festac Town, Mr. Fashola. There have been insinuations, rather, that even FHA itself is colluding on the building of structures on drainages, as it were. And of course, the heavy commercialization of residential blocks or flats. I'd like your thoughts on that. And even at some point, it's impacting on, when it comes to floodings and the acts of having issues unresolved. It's a back and forth scenario. So,
okay,
what exactly is FHA?
So let me respond again. As I told you, if you can hear me, let me respond again. I disagree with the behavior that violates master plans. So I agree with the concerns that you raise. But bear in mind that as minister, I am not the managing director of FHA. And I've started my response by telling you that they have their statutory functions. We have a director on their board who reports to us. And these things that you talk about, I am almost certain that they did not happen in the last 8 years of this administration. They were things that we inherited that we are trying to correct. And that is my oversight. But in terms of the day-to-day management of FHA, that is not my responsibility. That is the responsibility of the board and the managing director. What I do at the end of each year or periodically is to get reports from our representative of the board that all is going well or all is not going well. But if they have inherited violations of master plans, as you say, and I know that there are some, because I go to Festac too when I was in governor in Lagos, and I knew Festac as a child. That doesn't mean that it was this administration that did it, but it doesn't mean that at the snap of a button, all of those are going to go away, because those interests were created somewhat with some kind of agreements or understanding in the name of the authority. So it requires a very painstaking approach. Some of it, as I told you, has been clawed back, but not all of it has been clawed back. And so the details you seek, I would advise you direct to the management of the Federal Housing Authority.
Noted, Mr. Fashola. Now, when it comes to federal roads, we've gotten feedback from, the likes of, when it comes to Benin, Warri, and Ota roads, that these federal roads were basically untouched. And I'm just wondering how you can respond to that. And also, since we're talking about roads, there's also a question about the timeline for the completion of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, whether it will be completed during your time or this will be passed on to the incoming administration.
So let me speak to the Warri, and I believe you are talking of Benin, Saple, Warri Road. We have just awarded the contracts because we got funding from NNPC. And there are other roads that we have not touched. And I understand that the ones that we have done are no longer newsworthy. I understand that. And it is the one that remains untouched. I believe the other road you mentioned about Lagos-Ota Road. Lagos-Ota Road has a contract. And the contractor, given the limited funds, has chosen to start working from the Lagos end. So for those who use the road from the Lagos end, they will tell you it is now better. But we have not reached the Ota end into Ogun. So it remains work in progress. And no administration finishes everything that it starts. So whatever we leave uncompleted, we will pass on to the next government. But in terms of, and my sense, and let me say this, my sense is that these roads exist to connect people and to connect states. So there are about 5 roads that connect Lagos to Ogun. The Lagos-Ota Road is one of them, which we haven't finished. What about the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway? Does it not connect to Ogun? It does. The Ikorodu-Shagamu, does it not connect to Ogun? It does. So we have made progress. Out of about 4 roads, we have done 3 connecting Lagos to Ogun. The next one, the next team will come and complete it. Even if we had all of the monies, sometimes it's just impracticable to finish. In terms of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, from the Ojota end to the toll gate in Ibadan now, any fair observer will tell you that over the last 8 years, there has been substantial progress, and I emphasize substantial progress. There are gridlocks arising from traffic jams, accidents, and all of that. But when the road is free now, it's less than 2 hours to go to Ibadan. There's work being done on the Lagos end, the last 6 kilometers. We left that for the last because we knew it would cause a lot of discomfort. And we thought that the discomfort would be better assuaged if you get through it and you drive about 80, 90 kilometers of smooth traffic, which is what is happening. But I've asked those and I've appealed publicly for people's understanding and patience. This is not a virgin road. We're expanding an old road where residential, business, and user density has just grown in extraordinary and phenomenal capacity. Over 40,000 vehicles use that road. So we have to close off sections for the safety of those who are constructing as well. And so it's not a place where you will drive 100 kilometers per hour, over 6 kilometers. After that is a free ride. So just bear with us. Now, in terms of completion, we think that we will finish all of that. In terms of full definition, the road is 127 kilometers. So from 0 in Lagos to 116 inside Ibadan, we would have finished. Between 116 to 127, which is 9 kilometers, we can't finish that before we go. The reason is that the Oyo State government is constructing a drainage channel across, and we think it is sensible and value for money to wait for them to finish the channel before we build the road, instead of having them open the road after we have constructed it. So that's my answer. So you will have 116 kilometers of motorable lane-marked highways, and you will see some parts of the road have already been lane-marked. So it's just the last few kilometers. So that's my response.
All right, Mr. Fashola, let's talk about the issue of financing of your projects. And it's been said that questions asked about the administration not adopting the PPP model with the private sector in most of these projects. I'd like your thoughts on that. And in terms of paying back these monies borrowed for the projects, as you've already mentioned, I'd like you to expatiate on that, sir.
Borrowings, did you say? Yes, there are some borrowings. You see, again, I don't know those who talk about PPPs, how much they know about it. It is a matter in which, without any quest for self-adulation, I have some experience, not only as a legal practitioner who has been involved in doing advisory work before I came into government on privatization, but also as an operator, as a government who has negotiated and signed PPP agreements for the Lekki-Ekpe Expressway, the toll gates there, and now as minister, having to review some of the PPPs. So those who speak about PPPs, perhaps, I don't know what they know, but if you have the Dangote Group, the NLNG Group, the BUA Group, MTN, Mainstream Energy investing in roads, are they not private sector? And that's what's happening. NNPC Limited. And that's a major funding component of some of our roads now. It's brought over 2 trillion, which is unprecedented in the history of private capital, into our infrastructure space. Apart from that, you now have the Sukuk Fund, replicated across Nigeria. You will see the signage. It's private capital investing in government road funding financing structures. So those who say we are not engaging PPP, I don't know what they mean, but our hands have been burnt by some PPPs that never took off because they were not well done. And I speak without disparaging anybody about the Lagos-Ibadan and the second Niger Bridge. They were supposed to be PPPs. They delivered nothing until we came. The concession for Lagos-Ibadan was signed in 2006. It didn't deliver a road as of 2015 when I took it over. And so those who don't know about these things will say it won't cost you a couple. It costs government a lot because it wastes time, it delays. Some of these projects fail because there's just no capacity to do them. And just yesterday in council, we were debating this issue, and some of the positions that I advocated was that there must be a distinction in PPPs between commercial and social assets. Roads, rail, airport runways, and those kind of things. They are social assets. and government should focus on delivering them. Coaches on the rail, airport terminal buildings, and those type of things are commercial assets. Way bridges, toll plazas. Yes, you can build the road and then ask somebody to come and operate the toll plaza, as we did on the Lekki Link Bridge. It was solely built by the Lagos State government. Otherwise, oftentimes, the people who want to then do the PPP do what? They go and borrow money, then they come back to government, give us a guarantee. If you are guaranteeing the payment and they default, who is paying? So if you are the one who is ultimately going to pay, why don't you just raise the money and do it yourself? As far as certain classes of assets are concerned. But this administration, through its tax credit policy, has shown that there are certain types of PPPs that are a win-win. But you see, not everybody can participate because the cost of building a road, because it is credit payment of your profits, of your tax in advance that you give to government. And so if you are a company doing 1 billion naira turnover, and maybe out of turnover, profit is about 20-30% or 15% ROI, that is 150 million. Out of that, 33% is tax of 150 million. That's about, I think, 445 million. That won't build a road. So you are not eligible. And that is why you see those who are playing in this industry, BUA, NLNG, Dangote, MTN, Midstream, and multi-billion corporations. And we hope that many more will come in. But that is a successful model of PPP, as well as the Sukuk and some other things that have been done.
Noted, Mr. Fashola, when it comes to some of the projects that you've engaged in, of course, you have received kudos. And in terms of, for instance, the Third Mainland Bridge, where the 6.28 billion naira was approved, you know, there was some backlash from Nigerians talking about the frequency with which these repairs happen and the amount and also the timing. So do you think, for instance, that aspect could have been handled differently, or were there more other urgent issues that funding should have gone to?
Okay, for those people who speak in sometimes anger, if they're justified, I sympathize with them. If they're unjustified, I ignore them. And the easiest thing to do, really, is to criticize another person's undertaking. Everybody's job looks easy when you are not the one doing it. So your work in the studio looks easy to me because I'm not the one doing it. Your cameramen before me here are doing nothing as far as I'm concerned. They are just standing behind the camera because I'm not the one doing it. But I'm a professional. So I respect other professions and I respect what they do. Those who just backlash don't know what happens. Then, if you have never governed before, which government in the world has enough money to do everything it wants to do? You have to make competing choices. At that time, the problem with the Third Mainland Bridge was its structural integrity. The expansion joints had failed. The bearings were moving. Many of them had damage. There was erosion over years on the piles in the water, given all of the bad things or toxic things that we even pour in our water. Then some of the pile caps, the barges that were ferrying cargo, had run into some of them. So we felt, first of all, that this bridge must not collapse. We don't have the money to build a new one. So that was what we faced, structural safety. Now, at the time, any fair-minded critic who wants to backlash me will agree that the driving surface, the asphalt, was in relatively better condition. So why spend money that was not enough to do everything on focusing on where the need was not as deep? So that's what we did. Over years, 2 years after, there has been a rapid deterioration now of the asphaltic wearing course. And that is the technical name for it. For those who don't know, it's called a wearing course. That is because it usually wears off and you replace it. It has worn off. There are now many potholes. And this is the time to replace it. And that's what we are going to do now. So what we are doing now is largely aesthetic. And also all the rails that have been stolen by criminal elements who see those things as public assets and they just go. That's what we want to repair now. we have made sufficient progress on the structural stability of the bridge. We haven't, by the way, finished the work with the underwater pipe. So let me say that to you. But that work is not visible. Once we opened the bridge, few, if any, people knew that there were divers still working. It's just like the Akmogbo Bridge, and people say nothing is going on. I know what's going on. There's work going on under. I can show you the photographs. But whilst we were doing that, they set fire to the Jora section. So these are the realities of what we have, and to those who are fair-minded and who want to find out also the facts. These are the facts. What was compelling at the time, and we didn't have all of the money, was structural safety. When a building wants to collapse and it is losing paint, do you paint it first or do you save it from collapse? That's what we wanted to do. And don't go and quote me, I didn't say the bridge was going to collapse, but preventive maintenance against that kind of incident. Yes, now that's the headline that some people...
all right, Mr. Fashola, I'm still going to take you up on that Ijora section of the bridge that was, that caught fire. What's the latest on that? And what's the legacy you're leaving behind in the housing sector, if you can help us combine both?
Okay, the Ijora sector is that some of the equipment that we use for these bridge repairs and bridge restoration when they are damaged are imported. So just as we were making progress on the Akmogbo, the Ijora section was so severely burnt that section could collapse. So you will see that we closed it off. Now, it was in such a state of serious distress that the work we were doing on Akmogbo had made significant progress in terms of structural stability. We diverted all the resources that had been imported to stabilize Ijora from collapsing. Because even at that time, there was no contract. We just told the contractor, go and move in on an emergency basis. So the two are running simultaneously. The contractor in our last month's review told me that he will finish Akmogbo by the end of May, but that he cannot open it because the approach to Akmogbo is from that Ijora section, which he hasn't finished. So we will come to Lagos before I leave, just to come and explain to Lagosians, and hopefully your crew will be there, and he will tell us when he can finish the Ijora section, because if that place is not structurally safe, I won't open it to traffic and have people's lives on my hand.
Well said, Mr. Fashola. Now, of course, this administration is winding down, but we're just wondering, if you're offered a position by the incoming administration, is it something that you're looking to consider?
I think that we should leave the... why is this question this thing? And I think that we should just leave this matter to the president-elect to decide who he wants to work with. And truth be told, many people worked even in this government without holding a title. He inclusive. He was the fiercest defender of this government, even before he became candidate. He was the fiercest supporter of this government, and I know areas where he and I also collaborated without holding a title. So how many places are there for everybody to get a title? So all of us, you guys in your studio, are serving without a title. So all of us must serve our country with or without titles. And I think that is all I would say about that matter. And we must respect the prerogative of the president-elect to choose whoever he wants to work with.
Great, noted. Understand your discretion. Now, can you just tell us about the intervention of the federal tertiary institutions when it comes to internal roads?
Okay, that was my own brainwave. I went to give a lecture at one of the universities, convocation lecture, and I saw that the internal roads of that federal university was in some state of disrepair. And when I asked the vice chancellor, he said, well, that really they didn't have the resources. And I went to school in Nigeria. All of my education is in Nigeria. And it was just a throwback for me to the University of Benin, those streets that I used to walk at night, with street lighting on them, even though, I mean, it was still NEPA problem, but it was lit up and we had fun. And I said, on this desk, if there's something I would do, was to persuade members of the National Assembly to give me some funding to intervene in federal tertiary institutions. And I want to say in the next National Assembly, instead of some of the things that some of our elected representatives want to do, which are state responsibility, for which federal funds are spent, and this is something that we should put an end to, really. There are federal institutions in their constituencies, federal government colleges, federal medical centers, federal universities, federal colleges of education in need of one thing or another, a new classroom, a new laboratory, new roads, and those are kind of things. That is the proper way, in my view, for representatives in the national government to spend federal funds and leave the states to deal with state funds and the local government councillors to deal with local government matters. But I am happy to say that we're in almost, I think the last count was we were in about 77 or so federal tertiary institutions. All we are doing 1 or 2 kilometers, no more, but they are impactful because the feedback from the students, from the lecturers is that it is impacting education. Places where it took them 30 minutes within a campus to travel is now 5 minutes. Places where students didn't used to go to class because it was all muddy and mushy, they were back in school. So those are also inputs of education that is not quantified when we go with those funny data that we are spending certain percentage of some amount on education and we are not spending enough. That's an investment in education, but it is in the Ministry of Works and Housing. And this is true of, so back then I used to tell people, when the government comes to clear refuse and pays for refuse in a school, sanitation, the budget is not the Ministry of Education, it's the Ministry of Environment. When the government is undertaking school nutrition, feeding program in school, the budget is not in Ministry of Education, it's probably in Ministry of Health or so. So we must have a broader look at the way we manage and report data so that we get the full complement of what we are investing. Sometimes also, they will just take the budget of one unitary republic who has a parliamentary system of government that captures everybody's budget in one place, and then use a percentage of it to judge Nigeria and just take only the federal government budget and say, oh, they are spending less, this country is spending more. Meanwhile, you have ignored the budget of the 36 states and the 774 local governments. And so you are painting a very suboptimal picture of what's going on in the country.
All right, Mr. Fashola, just before we let you go, briefly in 1 minute, please, what is your advice to the incoming administration?
Well, I think, again, this is something about which I feel strongly. I've seen a lot of people trying to set agenda for the incoming administration. I won't join that bandwagon. The incoming administration campaigned on a manifesto, Hope Renewed, where they set out what their agenda will be if elected. The majority has elected them on that agenda. That is the agenda that they must pursue and deliver. Thank you.
And we'd like to say a big thank you to you.
You can't change the rules in the middle of the game.
Duly noted. We'd like to say a big thank you to you too, Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, SAN. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. We appreciate your time and all the best.